Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nicole Lamberson. I am a physician assistant, and I also do outreach for the film Medicating Normal, including hosting conversations like this one today. Our guest today is Selma Eikelenboom. Tell me how to pronounce the hyphenated portion.
Well, it is Eikelenboom, like
Eikelenboom.
and Schieveld.
Okay.
Is what a lot of people who cannot say the.
Okay, so I'm just going to call you Selma, if that's okay.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine.
Okay. Okay, so a brief bio on Selma. She is a forensic scientist at Independent Forensic Services, IFS, in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She received a degree from the College for Social Work in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, in 1976, followed by 10 years experience in psychotherapeutic treatment. Selma graduated from medical school from the Free University in Amsterdam in 1992. She worked 8 years as a resident in surgery, emergency medicine, obstetrics, and internal medicine. And from 2000 on, she focused on medical forensics as coroner for the city of Amsterdam and at the biology department of the Netherlands Forensic Institute, the state forensic laboratory. In 2003, she started IFS with her husband, who is a forensic DNA expert. In 2011, they moved to Colorado and opened a second laboratory. Through her forensic medical work, she became interested in a possible association between DNA variants, psychoactive medication, and violence. That became the emphasis of her work, leading to a research project with the University of Denver and a PhD in March 2021. And in January of 2021, she and her husband moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. So hi, Selma. Thank you so much for joining me today. Everyone who's watching, sorry, we're a little bit late. We had some kind of weird Zoom technical issue that we have no idea how we fixed, but we fixed it. So we're here. I'm so excited to talk to you today, Selma. So first, is there anything I left out in your introduction? Anything you want to share about yourself? Comments about the film, if you were able to watch it, anything like that?
Well, that's a lot of questions in one question.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. You just go ahead with what you want to know. How I can serve your viewers. That's the most important thing.
Okay, great. So, I guess first, maybe it's helpful for you to tell us how you became interested in psychoactive medications, specifically as they relate to your specialty of forensic medical work.
Well, I was working as a forensic medical examiner in Colorado, and I was contacted by a lawyer in Colorado who had a case of a woman who had killed her husband. And they specifically asked about the CYP450 profiles. And even though I'm a medical doctor and I am allowed to prescribe medication outside the United States, and I was not aware of any association with medication and violence. But because we did forensic DNA, they came to our lab to ask if we could do the Cytochrome P450 testing, and it turned out we did the testing, and it turned out that this woman had severe problems with metabolizing medications. And when I researched the case and looked at the evidence, it was not too hard to find that association that made it. I'm just going to adjust my camera. That made it very likely that the state she was in when she committed this murder was due to the medication. Mm-hmm. And so then I started to look at the other cases I was doing, and I was really surprised by how many people were on psychoactive medication. And from then on, it evolved.
Yeah. So you actually trained and went to medical school, and in your medical training, you had nothing about the potential for this to be a reality with those medications. Is that correct? Or yeah.
No, well, my training as a doctor was some years ago now, and the science that we work with today really started after I finished med school.
Okay.
But in any continuous education or in papers, you can hardly find any information about it. You really have to look very thoroughly. And the last couple of years, you can see ever since the publication of Lucier in 2011, you can see there's a growing awareness. I mean, a lot of people and physicians know there is some kind of connection between using medication and acts of violence like suicide and homicide.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no awareness that there are genetic tests you can do to predict who are the people who are most at risk for these medications, for these side effects. Okay.
So a lot of people might not know what the Cytochrome P450 system is. So can you like sort of break down in layman terms how that system is important to metabolizing drugs? What are the CYP450 genes, that kind of thing?
Well, you have these very old genes. The body is built up from the DNA, mm-hmm. And the DNA is functional through genes. And so the genes make all kinds of proteins that get the body to act, to be alive and to function. Mm-hmm. Now you have certain genes that generate enzymes, and enzyme is proteins, and those enzymes metabolize medication or any stuff that comes from outside the body that's not supposed to be in the body. They want to get it out of the body. So these proteins go after this medication, they nibble pieces of it so that it can be expelled from the body. And depending on what you read, between 75 to 90% of all medications is metabolized, so expelled from the body by just a handful of genes. And we call those the CYP450 genes. There are a lot more, but from the whole system, there are about 10 genes that are important for expelling medication from the body. Okay.
And are those same genes responsible for expelling other classes of medications as well, or just the psychoactive?
No, just of all medications, they 80% or more is metabolized by by that handful of genes.
Okay, got it. So, and then what exactly is a DNA variant, and what does it mean that someone has a variant? When you say like variants in DNA can result in violence?
Well, you can have pieces of DNA that differ between people. Mm-hmm. And those pieces, because the DNA generates the proteins that are that make the body function. Mm-hmm. If people have different sorts of proteins, of pieces of DNA there, we call them different alleles. We call them variant alleles. So say everybody has dark hair. And that's what we see in the main population. Most people have dark hair. Now, if there's somebody with blonde hair or with red hair, we call that a variant. Okay. And it turns out that people who have that kind of variants on their DNA with regards to the CYP450 system, they might not be able to metabolize the medication in the same speed as somebody who does not have a variant. And the prescribers, they don't look at, does somebody has a variant? They look at the general population and they say, well, generally people need 3 times 1 tablet per day to attack some kind of illness. But if you have people who are not able to get that medication out of their system quickly enough, then that medication is too high. But you have also variants of people who have extra proteins who can expel medication very quickly from their body. And then the medication will not work. So you have to really know what kind of variant somebody has to determine what kind of medication might work with them. Mm-hmm. Or what medication will cause side effects. Because if you have too much of the medication in your body, then it will accumulate, and then you get side effects, and that's very often toxic for the brain. So that's when you get those behavior problems.
So do you know, like when they are developing psychiatric drugs or doing trials on them, do they ever test anyone's DNA prior to that? Or they just have these samples of people and that's how they say like, this is a standard dose, but they have no idea what the CYP 450 system is in each of these people in the trial?
No, they don't. I mean, yeah, I wish they did, but then they would have all the money they can spend now on marketing. They should spend then on research, and they're not willing to do that because that kind of information would probably lead to less medication being prescribed. And hey, pharmaceutical companies have a business model, so they're not going to do that. And they sometimes they look at, okay, what are there any interactions between certain genes and certain drugs? So they look at it, but most of those research is done on very small groups of people, and very often it's also only done in cells, in cell cultures. So they have a cell, they take a piece of liver, chop it up, and put it in layman's term, throw some medication at it, and then measure how much medication there is and how many metabolites there are. So then we assume that in the liver of people, blah, 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 then they put it to the general population. Well, that's not very specific. And that's exactly the reason why now medication is one of the I think the third or the fourth reason, aside from COVID, that people die. Medication is very dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. So in your work, you have done some stuff with akathisia, which is a well-known adverse effect of psychiatric medications. Is akathisia potentially related to drug metabolism?
Well, the first problem is it's not well known. I mean, it's well known amongst your viewers and amongst the people who've had it, but many physicians are totally not aware of akathisia, and that's what makes it so dangerous. And akathisia is a medical induced problem. So you can have some movement disorders. It's disorder caused by illnesses. But if we're talking about akathisia related to medication, it's due to the medication. And it's a symptom of toxicity in the brain. I mean, with psychoactive medication, you mess around with the neurotransmitters in the brain. And the brain is a neural network. It's connected, all the brain parts are connected. And the connecting piece between those areas are the neurotransmitters. Now, people say, and research has said, okay, many psychiatric illnesses, if you want to call them, but many psychiatric behavior is associated with certain neurotransmitters. So you know what, let's get in some neurotransmitters, and then we assume that people will get better. But they have no idea what's going on in the brain. You cannot take a needle to somebody's brain, take some blood out or take some tissue out and see what's going on there. So it's completely experimental. So they put some neurotransmitters in there, and then they change the whole system. And you can have in different people with the same medication, you can have totally different symptoms. But the akathisia, the restlessness, the emotions going with it, the terror, the deep depression, the emotional blunting, it's all signs of messing with the neurotransmitters that connect the brain parts.
I see. So it doesn't have to be a metabolism problem. It could just be an adverse effect from messing with the system in general.
Well, it is. You can have side effects of neurotoxicity at low levels. And the consensus is the higher the levels, the more chances you have of those side effects. But it can happen at low levels as well. So even if people metabolize medication properly, it can still happen. But it's a fact that if they have high levels or if they are not able to metabolize it, then you get more side effects. And in that case, it's interesting to know that what I missed a bit in the movie is it's not only the medication or the SSRI or the antipsychotic. It's just as dangerous is the combination, the drug-drug interactions. And especially if you take, that's from my research I did for my PhD, if people have 2 or more medication, they're at risk for having severe side effects. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's not only related to metabolism, there are other genes that you can test. And those are transporter genes and receptor genes in the brain. And if people have certain variants there, then you know they're not very likely to react beneficial to medication. So they don't get a therapeutic response, or even worse, they have a bigger chance of suffering some side effects. So besides from the CYP450s you have to test, you also have to test the transporters and the receptors. And that's basically fairly new science that's going on. But I see with a lot of my patients, with a lot of the cases that I do, mm-hmm. even if people have normal CYP450 genes, but they have bad transporter and receptor genes, they get into trouble as well.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know anything about the transporter genes. I've had myself a test done by GeneSight. Uh-huh. And have you heard of that company?
Yes.
Okay. So they their marketing materials say it provides information about which medications may require dose adjustments, are less likely to work, or have an increased risk of side effects based on your genetic information. So I was going to ask you, I mean, my insurance paid for 100% of it. So that made me feel like it was legitimate, right? But are those tests reliable? How accurate are they? And does something like GeneSight test for that other, set of genes that you were just talking about that isn't the CYP450?
Yeah, that's there are some basic problems here. And one of the basic problems is that those laboratories, I myself use OneOme in Minneapolis, and I know I've seen several tests of GeneSight, and they do, the tests are more or less the same. The problem is the interpretation. They are very evidence-based and say they look at the literature, but what I lack is common sense. So they only look at one gene and one medication, and then they advise about that. But like I said, if people have drug-drug interactions, that has the same effect as a drug-gene interaction. So somebody might have a genetic, bad genetic variant at, say, for 2D6. But if you have a patient who has a normal 2D6 CYP450 gene, but they have a combination of 2 medications that stop 2D6 from working, let's put it like that. And many psychoactive medications are metabolized by CYP2D6. So if you combine medications that both need 2D6 to be expelled from the body, yeah, well, if an enzyme works on one medication, it cannot work on another. So you get accumulation from the one medication and people get toxic. Now, in the reports from those laboratories, they don't mention that. They only look at one gene and one medication. And you can, sometimes they put in, okay, if you have more medications, you can get side effects from one medication to the other, but it's not a very comprehensive one. You should just say, look, somebody asks you these results, and they need to be interpreted in a logical way. And so it means you look at which medication do people take, how are their genes, what are the drug-drug interactions, what are the drug-gene interactions, and what are the drug-drug-gene interactions. Because if you, for instance, have a variant allele for CYP2D6, and you have 2 medications that both need 2D6, well, you can imagine that's not going to work.
Yeah.
But you don't get that in those reports. But those reports, it's very important that people have themselves tested before they get any medication, and educate themselves about it. You can find anything on the internet.
Yeah.
And if you educate yourself, you can talk to the doctor and say, like, look, I saw here that this medication, there's a drug interactions there. Can you explain that to me? Then I bet you there are a lot of side effects and a lot of terrible things will be prevented.
Mm-hmm. But do you think physicians, if you showed up with a gene site test, do you think they understand with their level of knowledge about these fairly new concepts? Do they understand how to interpret the data themselves? Or do you really need like a specialist, somebody like you?
Yeah. well,
Yeah.
that's a lot of the work I do. I see the consequences of people having those tests done, still haven't got those medication, and then the physician think, well, okay, in this report it says you can take paroxetine very easy. For instance, I get all fired up. Mm-hmm. If you talk about paroxetine, it's one of the most dangerous medication there is. I think it should be taken off the market. Mm-hmm. But if you look at genetic testing, some scientists say if somebody is an intermediate metabolizer, so okay, he has some variant, but he still has some enzyme that works, it's okay, you can give paroxetine. Now, I've seen so many people who are intermediate metabolizers going completely into problems with normal doses paroxetine. So the interpretation lacks. And then they say, I talked to several scientists about it, and say, yeah, but well, there hasn't been enough research done, so we cannot say that. No, but you can think, you can understand if you look at people and you see how they react. Well, maybe it has to do with them being an intermediate metabolizer, so maybe you should still. So if they do the work, they would see them themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that if a patient, because if you spend a couple of hours online and you start researching drug interactions, and you start researching CYP450, and you start researching transporter, and then you can educate yourself pretty good. Now, if you then have yourself tested, and with the test results, hey, you can ask a specialist. I mean, I have a lot of people I advise on that. Mm-hmm. And you go to a doctor and you say, yeah, okay, this is what you prescribe to me. Can you explain that? And if they start like the guy in the movie, it's they don't want to do it. Sue the guy, tell them like, look, I think you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. Now, I will be back next week, and I want you to read up on the product information. Mm-hmm. And if you do not give me a good advice, I will go to a lawyer. Because the girl went to a lawyer, but they were talking about suing the pharmaceutical companies. No, she should go after the prescriber.
Yeah.
It's his responsibility or her responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense.
I mean, I don't understand it. There are nurse practitioners who have prescription possibilities, physician's assistants, they prescribe medication. And I mean, many doctors don't know these CYP450 systems or the drug interactions, and neither do the other prescribers. They should be held responsible.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, where do you think the blame lies then? I mean, is it a total lack of education? Is it like we need to make everybody have continuing medical education to learn these concepts? How do we fix it?
Well, I don't think that any continuous medication is going to help if somebody is not willing to open the medication and look into and read the product information. I mean, it's all, even though I think the product information is often too conservative. Mm-hmm. If you read it, it's quite clearly, there are black box warnings, and the black box warnings is the last measure before it's taken off of the market. So, I mean, you can come up with continuous education. If they are not willing to do that piece of work, then they're not going to listen they're not going to listen to continuing education. No, I really think that physicians and prescribers are very scared to get sued. I was reading on Medscape about these psychiatrists who were saying how good lithium is. I mean, there's no reason not to prescribe lithium because it works fantastic. And it's okay, a little bit toxic, but if you decrease the dosage, blah, 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 blah. Then they said, you have to make a note in your patient record that you talk to a patient about prescribing him lithium. And if they don't want it, okay, then it's their decision. But be careful, because you can be sued if you don't suggest lithium. So that's how scared they are. So imagine what happens when patients go to prescribers and say like, okay, but can you tell me, did you test my CYP450s? That doesn't mean anything. No? Well, here's the literature. Yeah. And if you do not want to study, educate yourself, then I'm going to another doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's just being a good advocate for yourself, right? And that's what you have to do now to be safe as a patient, is to be your own best health advocate.
And you ask where to put the blame. Well, the pharmaceutical companies, we all know that they are just interested in selling the medications. And the problem is also many patients just want a pill, a quick fix.
Yeah.
And there are some people, I mean, I generalize, but of course there are good doctors. There are doctors who are very aware of the CYP450. But in general, they're not interested. And so the blame is with the pharmaceutical companies. The blame is with the politicians who give them so much freedom to market their products. I mean, it's crazy that you have these advertisements here, these how do you call them, on television. The ads.
Direct to consumer advertising.
I mean, in Europe, we don't have that. No, at least not in the Netherlands. It's ridiculous. So if you tell people that everybody is nowadays has a psychiatric illness, but we have a quick fix and here's the pill, then it's the patient's responsibility as well. And of course, the doctor or the prescriber, who, I mean, I last had a case of a person who was prescribed an antidepressant, an antipsychotic, anti-anxiety, and a stimulant. I mean, what are these people doing?
Yeah, that was my drug cocktail. It doesn't make sense when you sit down and actually think about it, you know. But if you're just trusting your doctor and you're deferring your health decisions to someone that you think is an expert, then I think patients don't put that much thought into it. They just take what they're prescribed and they think they're being a good, compliant patient. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's like tying somebody to 4 horses with the arms and the legs and then going in all different ways.
Yeah. That's a great image that I have. Yeah. So, I've heard what you were talking about. Polypharmacy increases risk because, you know, the drugs use the same CYP450 pathway, but I've heard things like cigarette smoke, food like cruciferous vegetables and char grilled meats can use the CYP450 system as well. Is that significant enough where it changes drug levels at all? Yeah,
it is. That's what makes it so complex. And but it's also caffeine, nicotine, all those. But you can find them online. The substances that interfere, because caffeine is not something that belongs in our body. It's what we put. It's a drug. Yeah. And the same it's with nicotine. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not supposed to be there. So your body is eager to get that substance out of your system. And they interfere with medication as well. Wow. So if you're smoking, well, what smoking actually do is it induces certain CYP450. So it makes them work harder. Mm-hmm. So if you have a medication that needs to be metabolized by a CYP450 that is working faster because you smoke or you have caffeine, then it means that the medication will not work because it's out of your body too quickly.
I see. Okay. So that may have implications like for people who are tapering and stuff like that. Like if you're tapering a drug and you want certain levels in your system and to be able to lower them, but then if you smoke or you eat char grilled meats or something, you could raise and lower levels in your system just by doing those things.
Yeah, and that's why there's so many people who have different experiences with tapering, and that's why I'm not really a fan of the taper strips, because they're still too generalized. You really have to look at how does a patient feel, and so it's not only the caffeine or the nicotine, but it's also other medications. And so if you are on 2 or more medication and there are drug interactions, if you suddenly lower one medication while you are still on another medication, then it could be, well, let me give you an example. Suppose you are a good-looking movie star and you work very hard, but you have pain in your back, so you get tramadol for the pain in your back. Now, tramadol is metabolized into morphine. Mm-hmm. Now, then you get, so you start taking the tramadol, and it's metabolized into morphine, so your back pain is less, but you have a bit trouble sleeping. And then the doctor says, well, I have this great pill that will help you sleep. And they come up with the SSRIs. Mm-hmm. Here we go, the Zoloft or the Prozac or whatever. Mm-hmm. And now what happens is that Zoloft inhibits the metabolism of tramadol. Mm-hmm. And Zoloft also has a side effect that it makes many men impotent. Mm-hmm. So here you are taking this medication and you're this good-looking movie star, and now you suddenly cannot enjoy all the pretty girls that come after you. Yeah. So what do? You stop with the SSRI, because if you look it up, you say, oh, here I get sexual problems, so it's going to be away with the SSRI. But what happened in your body is that the metabolism from tramadol to morphine has stopped. Mm. But you're still taking the tramadol because your back still hurts. So the tramadol goes higher, mm-hmm. because you were on the SSRI, and suddenly you stop the SSRI. What happens? Oh, well, then you have this huge dose of morphine in your system. And what happens if you have an overdose of morphine? Well, you can die. Yeah. Yes. And what does the coroner say? Drug overdose. And then we say, oh, stupid actors, they shouldn't take all these drugs. And no, it's an accident. I see. Okay. So then is that an argument for, I mean, so many people I meet who show up in our support groups who are on psychiatric medication, they realize they're a problem. They want to get off of them. They know that they have to taper them slowly. But most people are not on one drug. Most people, by the time they figure out there's a problem, they're on 2, 3, 4, that is the way of the medical system now, is just drugging people with polypharmacy. So that story example that you just told, is that an argument for when you plan a drug taper, should you lower the doses of everything at the same time slowly together? Or is pulling off one drug and leaving the others more dangerous? Yeah, it depends on exactly the CYP450 profile. It depends on the combination of medication. And so it's you cannot give a generalized, another problem is that if one medication inhibits what we call, so stops the function of a certain CYP450, that effect can still be there even though the medication is gone. Wow. So that it can take weeks before an enzyme recovers from, okay, hey, I'm not inhibited anymore. I wake up and then it suddenly starts working. I see. The main thing is listen to your body. I think your idea of gradually diminishing everything very slowly could work for some people.
Yeah.
For other people, you have to look at exactly what drug-drug interactions there are. But what really surprises me, and there are mechanisms that you can help your brain. It's a matter of, due to the medication, all the brain functions are withered away.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what you need to do is get those neurons, those brain cells growing again, active again. The most beneficial, the most efficient way to do that is exercise.
Okay.
And it's been a scientific fact that exercise stimulates brain growth or neuron growth. I don't understand why not more people pick that up. If you go start, even if you're at your lowest, go outside, set a goal. Today I'm going to that stoplight, and tomorrow I'm going to the second stoplight, and then to the third, and set yourself a goal with exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And that will help your brain recovering.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something to be said, right, about exercise instead of starting psychiatric medications, right?
It's amazing that from the research, it turned out that medication works in the same amount as exercise, psychotherapy, whatever therapy you can come up with, they all work more or less at the same level. Now, why would you prescribe people medication? Because normally we would say if the medication works just as well as placebo, then the medication doesn't work. So why would you prescribe it? I mean, I'm not anti-medication. I can imagine that in certain cases, people can be so overwhelmed by their emotion that a timeout through sedation by medication could be beneficial. But then only for a very short time, on the very close watch, and get them off it as soon as possible, but not as a primary tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And for these, life problems that we all have, like general life stressors, like stress at work or grief, that kind of thing. So when you study the DNA, you can determine, this person became violent most likely because they have these variants. But has there been any studies done on predicting if somebody will have like bad withdrawal syndromes or anything like that? Or is that not something that we can predict?
I wish, but I mean, there's no money in there. I mean, in the whole forensic medicine, there's no money because who's going to benefit from knowing more about how people die or why people die in criminal cases, and going into withdrawal. Medication is a business model. It's about making money. It's not about making people better. So why should they invest that?
Yeah, that's very true.
If you have consumer groups, the consumer groups are supported by the pharmaceutical companies. So they want to do research about more medication, not about getting less medication. That's why my PhD is not going to get much traction, because nobody is interested in, okay, why do people kill each other when they're on medication? That's not my problem. There's no money in it.
Yeah, it's sad because we should care about safety, about what happens to people and their health and that kind of thing. But you're right, it's just about profit.
Yeah, and that's what I missed in the film. You talk a lot about about suicide, but not about homicide. Mm-hmm. That's really the forgotten child. I mean, many people get into life-altering problems because they get homicidal, not only suicide, but homicide. And that's even a worse message than people killing themselves on the medication. But if you start killing your children, or if you start killing strangers, well, we don't want to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was going to be one of my other questions for you. And you don't have to answer. You can say you don't want to, but watching, TV with all of these mass shootings, and I always wait to hear what kind of medicine, psychiatric drugs these people are on. So do you have an opinion on if a lot of these violent acts and things that we're seeing have anything to do with psychiatric drugs?
Oh, I'm convinced of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've studied more than 100 cases of violence, and it's blatantly obvious that these medications have those effects. I mean, there are several scientific ways to look at causality, and the causality has been proved years ago. It's not new. It's just such a bad message that people don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And I mean, they say about gun control, well, guns don't kill people. People kill people. Yeah, but people on medication, then it is the medication that kills. So maybe we should do something about the medication. They don't want to do it. I mean, many pathologists don't even test the blood. I mean, it's crazy. They go to the hospital if somebody is violent or had an accident, and they check for illegal drugs. And they sometimes check for benzos. They don't check for prescription medication.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that if they start doing that, it would be scary to see how many people are on medication. And I always wait if I see those news, the news about another shooting, another killing, especially the violent killings, you know, really bloody. Then there always comes one moment when they say there were mental health issue. Well, mental health issue in the United States means medication.
Mm-hmm.
And either these people are on medication or they are in withdrawal because they feel so horrible on the medication.
Yeah.
But there's no incentive to look at exactly what medications they were on. I mean, because that would be opening Pandora's box.
Yeah. But isn't it, it's kind of the perfect trap, right? Because if you're on psychiatric medications, then everyone can say that you're a mental patient, and then they can say the act of violence was because you're a so-called mental patient.
Yeah, well, that's an argument that has been discarded. That's very easy to discard. There have been many healthy volunteer studies. Mm-hmm. People who had no psychiatric problems whatsoever, and they became suicidal or homicidal as well. So they don't have the problem. Another thing you can do for causality is challenge, re-challenge, de-challenge. So people are doing fine. They get the medication for a non-psychiatric reason, whatever it. I mean, there are women who have issues with urine problems. Mm-hmm. So they get antidepressants, and then suddenly these women become violent. Mm-hmm. And then you stop the medication, and then they're not violent anymore, and then you give it again, and then they become violent. That's called challenge, re-challenge. In the scientific world, that's already accepted as evidence for causality. It's just they don't want to make the leap to the violence in criminal cases. But if you are a good lawyer and you can put it up in a case, then a jury might be convinced. The problem here in the United States is they did it. He did it. He killed his wife. So whatever the reason, it doesn't matter. He killed her. That's far more important. But hey, wait a minute. There was never any problem until he got the medication, and then he killed his wife. That's how do you call it? In mitigating circumstances.
Yeah, right.
So there are lots of arguments you can say, like, look, he wasn't a mental patient. You made him a mental case.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what about genetics, as far as, like, I've talked to people who had problems with psychiatric medications themselves. They became suicidal on them, for example. And then only after they sort of connected the dots and they started thinking back in their family history, they're like, oh my gosh, my mother became suicidal on medications as well. So is there any evidence for, like, somebody in your family and you both having CYP 450 variants? Can it pass from person to person? And from, generation to generation. And instead of like what psychiatry says is, well, oh, your mother was mentally ill, so you are too. But couldn't the answer be both of you genetically just didn't tolerate psychiatric medications?
Yeah, well, it's not a question of can it be given through? It will be given through.
Mm-hmm.
So your CYP450 profile is determined by your father and your mother.
Mm,
So it will be given to the next generation.
I see.
And the nice thing about the testing, you can use it the rest for your life because your DNA, except for some other factors like epigenetic, but that's way too complicated. In general, you can say the CYP450 profile at your birth is the same as when you die. And that means that if you have trouble with certain medications, and that will be your whole life through.
Okay.
And because children, their liver is not completely full grown, so they are even more susceptible for side effects. But you will have the same profile and thus the same problem as your parents have.
Okay.
And that's something completely different from the suicide gene. I know there's a lot of research done typing out people's brains and seeing if there's one gene or two genes or 100 genes that are associated with suicide. That's something completely different. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay. Gotcha. So you say that you'll have the same CYP450 profile always. So that doesn't then explain why elderly people have a harder time with medication?
Well, in elderly people, the bodily functions decrease.
Mm-hmm.
The liver is not functioning as good as when they were young, and the kidneys and the brain. I mean, they're far more vulnerable for side effects. So that's the story of life. The younger are still not full grown, and the olders are going back to yeah. Well, the getting older makes your functions being less. So that's why they are more vulnerable.
I see. Okay. When somebody has a genetic variant like this, is it immediate that they will have problems, or can it take time for it to manifest?
Yeah,
when they start taking medication.
Yeah, and that's where the intermediate, my favorite group, comes in again.
Mm-hmm.
The intermediate are at most danger because it creeps up on them. It takes time before they really get such levels in their blood that it's toxic. So if you're a poor metabolizer, those are the people who have no function of their genes, of the genes for which they are poor metabolizers. So if somebody is a poor metabolizer for CYP2D6, then he'll probably notice straight away. And those are the people who say, like, look, I'm not going to take this medication anymore. They immediately make the connection. Mm-hmm. The people who are ultra rapid metabolizers, so who have more enzyme, they can have 3 genes or 3 alleles that produce enzymes, and they metabolize medications very quickly. So you can give, there are certain anti-pain medication that will not work with them because it goes out of the system. So if they get pain medication at 11 o'clock and at 4 o'clock they're still crying from pain, and you can know, like, hey, maybe these people metabolize it too quickly. But the intermediate, it goes very slowly. And for instance, there's research done for tamoxifen. That's a treatment for cancer in women with breast cancer. And it turned out that the women who are intermediate metabolizers have a far bigger chance of recurrence of the breast cancer than women who are normal metabolizers. Mm-hmm. So even though they say, well, intermediate metabolizers, we don't have to worry about them too much, they really are a group at danger.
Wow. Okay. And we talked about the polypharmacy too, and the char-grilled meats and the caffeine and all of that. But what about over-the-counter supplements?
Yeah.
Like, I know a lot of people will take stuff and they think that just because you can get it at CVS, it's totally benign. It doesn't do anything. But can those be metabolized by the CYP450 system as well?
Yeah, and that's what I started with. Anything coming outside of the body can have those effects. Yeah. I mean, so even the St. John's wort or whatever you can buy over the counter. I mean, there are many antihistaminicums. I don't know if I say that correctly. You can buy over the counter. but they are very dangerous, and they were developed out of pesticide in research.
Wow.
I mean, it's really the whole basis for the the psychoactive medication. It comes out of pesticide research. No wonder it's so toxic. So the light forms of antihistaminics you can buy over the counter, they're just as dangerous. I've had people who every time for their allergies they get these medication, and then they're not realizing they get depressed and melancholically and sad because of the medication. Then they go to the doctor and they say, well, the doctor says it's seasonal because it's dark now and there's not so much sun, and you know what, I think you're depressed, and then they get this antidepressants. But it's the anti-allergic medication because of the cat that they get the medication. I mean, it's everything you put from outside of your body, you should check very carefully.
Okay, that's a great take-home message. I think a lot of people don't fully understand. We just take things whenever we get a symptom, and there's no real thought into, this is a complicated system, and this in combination could be very dangerous.
Polypharmacy is not only related to prescription medication.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we have a question here from the audience. Let me see. Somebody said, can the CYP pathway or liver be damaged after taking psychiatric drugs so that it impacts future sensitivity and metabolism of other drugs later?
Yes. Yeah, and that's a big problem. Sometimes it's so toxic that it damages the organs. Yes. Okay.
And then someone else asks,
but that also is the case with alcohol. Don't think alcohol is beneficial, because it's toxic like hell, and it can damage your liver, it can damage your pancreas, it can damage your brain. So that's also something you take from outside in, and it's just like alcohol is a substance that can damage your liver. Lots of other medications can do that as well. So if you are not aware that you have certain variants that are not metabolizing toxic medication soon enough, you'll end up with permanent damage.
Wow. Okay. Somebody says akathisia and extrapyramidal symptoms usually happen after the drug has already left the body. Do you know what the hypothesis is for the cause of these symptoms in relation to genetics and drug metabolism?
Well, the problem is, like I said, the receptors and the transporters are withering away. Mm-hmm. And so if you stop the medication and the brain is not able to recover, then you can get these side effects. You can get these side effects if there's immediate reaction of the toxic substance in your brain. But if the medication is gone, and it means there's a lack of a certain substance in your brain because you stop the medication, even though if you have the medication, it's hurting your brain. So if it's out of the system and the brain is not able to recover, then you can get these side effects as well. And that's why I say go exercise, because learn some idiotic language that's very difficult. Yeah. And so stimulate your brain so that these receptors, these cells wake up again.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious in your work, if you have any, like an interesting case that you worked on where this violence happened or something that you'd like to share with us, one of your more interesting cases.
Yeah, well, what do you call interesting? I mean,
everything you've said in the last hour has been interesting to me. So I think.
Let me see. Yeah, there are. Well, I worked on the Aurora theater shooter. Mm-hmm. The boy in Colorado who shot these people, and of course these are terrible cases.
Yeah.
But if you look at the history of this boy, and I mean, most of it is already in the public domain, he was treated for social anxiety. You know, he was having trouble on the campus, and if people just talked to him, there probably wouldn't have nothing been wrong. But no, they gave him medication, and then it started from bad to worse, and he ended up killing all these people. But there's hardly any compassion for the fact that his life was destroyed, the life of his parents is destroyed. I mean, there's this whole other story on the school shootings. Oh, there's one thing that's very important that I want to put out to you.
Okay.
You hear with all those mass shootings and the school shootings, they are inspired by Columbine, but that's not true. Years before Columbine, when they started experimenting with these SSRIs, there was this case of a boy, a young boy who was like 15 or so, and he had obsessive compulsion, and they started this nice new pill, and he became extremely scared. He had these nightmares. The dreams are a very big red flag. He had these nightmares from which he could hardly wake up. So even if he was awake, he still had all these impressions from these nightmares. And in the nightmares, they told him to go to school, shoot all his schoolmates, shoot his parents, and shoot himself. And well, because he was in this trial, they thought like, maybe we should stop the medication. So they stopped the medication, and the hallucinations, the nightmares, the homicidal and suicidal ideation went away. But his obsessive compulsion came back. So they thought, let's give him the medication again, because it was gone. Yeah, I mean, if you're planning to kill yourself, then you don't have time to be obsessive compulsive. So I can imagine that.
Yeah.
They gave him the medication again, and again the nightmares came back, and then they stopped it together because they knew, yeah, okay, this is the medication. But that was years before Columbine.
Yeah. Wow. So we could have, we could learn, but we don't learn. We just keep doing the same thing over and over again.
And there are so I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
There are so many young, especially young children who killed their parents or their grandparents, and it's on medication, and they go to prison for 25 years to life because they did it. Yeah. But why?
So even when you prove that the genes set them up for this behavior, most of the time people wind up spending the rest of their life in jail regardless.
No, we've had some successes.
Mm-hmm.
It's in because the CYP450 is still relatively new, but you can notice in court they'll do anything to get my statements out. They're scared to death. But we had some cases where people got paroled early because if they are in prison, and if you can show like, okay, they're completely off the medication and they're doing fine, and I looked at the case, and there was this clear association with the medication and his behavior, and that proved causality, then they are willing to say like, okay, we grant him parole or something, or we will. I'm working on other cases where we're trying to overturn the verdict. So we're getting there, but it's only the beginning, and there's a lot of resistance, because you can imagine if this is going to be accepted as evidence, then a lot more people will come and say like, look, I want to have my CYP tested and see if I could have been the victim of this medication. And what makes me so angry is the fact there are many cases that have been settled outside court, where there was a clear evidence between the medication and the killing, and then they sue GlaxoSmithKline or Eli Lilly or whatever, and they settle it outside the court. So they get a lot of money, and instead of putting the people who are responsible behind jail, they just seal the records and it stays there. And with the CYP450, that's basically newly discovered evidence. So the people who are not so lucky for getting settlements out of court, they have a reason to fight it in court now.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm aware of the time. I don't want to take up your whole day, even though I could literally sit here and ask you questions for hours more. I think this stuff is so interesting, and I can see why you wanted to study it and become interested in it. I'm wondering if people want to learn more about themselves, which after talking to you, I think everybody should. Anyone who's going to ever take medication should probably learn about CYP450 and drug metabolism. Where are some good resources that you think people should look?
Yeah, well, there's this. If you look online and you go to drug interactions, there are lots of sites where you can put in the medication and you can see if there's drug interactions. And there's this site called SuperSip. It's there. They have a drug interaction that I like because it's colored. So they designate if there are problems with the drug interactions, but they are only the drug interactions, not the drug gene interactions. So if you have your CYP450 profile and your transporter and receptor genes, I mean, those are important. But if you read the interpretation, I mean, people can always, send me an email. I can look at them and see if they have a problem and say like, okay, you should go here or you should go there to get more information or change your treatment or whatever. But be aware, if you go to drug interactions, you only see the drug and the drug. And you have to realize that if a certain enzyme, if you have a variant for that, it will make it worse. So if you go to SuperSip, super and on CYP, SuperSip, find it out, you'll get to their website, and they specify which CYP450 metabolize which medication. So then you can deduce for yourself, okay, I have this medication against hypertension, and it's metabolized by a CYP that I know is not working properly because I have had my CYP tested. So I should take another medication. And at the SuperSip side, you can see alternatives. So it's a lot of work, but it's better to figure that out than ruminating about all the problems you have. I mean, there's lots that you can do as patient yourself.
Yeah. Well, and you also have a paper, Psychoactive Medication Violence and Variant Alleles for Cytochrome P450 genes, that was published in May 2021. So I'll have Angie put that paper in the comments for people so they can read that and learn from everything that you studied in that work as well.
Did you do the 2016 or what is it paper? I have two papers and they're both open access.
Okay, got it. We'll put that one.
Yeah, I paid a lot of money to get them open access because I think people should know it. So put those papers in there.
Okay, will do. And so I guess final question that I have for you is, based on all of your work and everything we've talked about here today and everything you've seen and your experience, what is your opinion on these medications? Like, if you had a message for prescribers and if you had a message for patients, what would it be?
Well, the message would be extremely careful with psychoactive medication. Try other therapies before you give it to people. If you give it, only use it very shortly. Warn the families. I mean, it says in the black box warning that people should be warned, the families. Get them in your office as if you're a physician or a prescriber and explain to them, look, you can get homicidal, you can try to kill your children, you can try to kill complete strangers, you can try to kill yourself, you can lose any sexual appetite that you have, you can become impotent for the rest of your life. But if you want, sign here. Then I think a lot of people would say like, oh, wait, I'll deal with my grief in another way. So yeah. Be open as a prescriber about what can happen. And prescribers, start reading the product information. I mean, you can get it online, one click, and you can read it, and take the black box warning seriously. And mainly listen to your patient. If they're not improving on the medication, it's most likely it's not the patients, it's the medication. So listen to them.
Yeah.
They tell you what's going on with them.
Yeah. Very true. Okay. Anything else you would like to add before we close out today?
Well, I could talk for hours.
I know. Maybe we'll have you back because it's just so interesting. And the more you talk, the more questions I have. I'm sure, reading about this is incredibly fascinating. So I've read your 2021 paper, but now I'm going to go find the 2016 one as well and continue reading.
Nicole, what we can do is I can give you examples. If we do it again in some time, for instance, I can make lists of medication and the sites and show people how to interpret it.
Yeah, that would be super helpful, I think, just like a tutorial so people could learn how to do this themselves, you know? Yeah, that would be great. Well, thank you for offering. And I know everybody, including myself, is just grateful for you sharing an hour of your time with us today.
No problem. No,
yeah.
I was glad you were having me, really.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
So I guess if anybody wants to contact you, what is your website so that they can find your...
The website, well, we don't do very much about that, but it's ifscolorado.com, IFS, Independent Forensic Services, ifscolorado.com. So that's the website. And they can email me at Selma, like in Selma, Alabama. And then at the sign for email and then ifscolorado.com.
Okay, great. So I'll just read some closing thoughts and then we will wrap for today. So thanks everybody for joining us for this live discussion. If you have not seen the film Medicating Normal yet, you can check our website at medicatingnormal.com/watch, where you can rent or buy the film. For more upcoming live interviews like this one, just go to the events tab on our Facebook page. If you want to see previous interviews that we've done, you can go to youtube.com/medicatingnormal. Lastly, if you'd like to support our outreach efforts to bring the film and conversations like this one to more communities worldwide, you can make a donation at medicatingnormal.com/donate. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much, Selma, for talking to me. It's been a pleasure and so interesting. So everybody take care. Thanks. We'll talk soon. I'll email you, Selma, about maybe coming back and doing that tutorial.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.